year-old boy, and as a result, Sebastian had his innocence taken from him. He used more explicit terms at other times, but I'm sure you can grasp what I'm suggesting here. Seth went on to explain that he felt that Sebastian not received the proper kind of care or counseling, and that as a result, he hadn't properly processed or recovered from the traumatic experience. My son is a victim, he said, and if victims don't get the proper help, they repeat because all of a sudden they think it's normal. And studies show that victims of childhood sexual abuse will go on to become offenders themselves. So Seth is completely right about this. He continued, my son's autistic, and if he doesn't get the proper help, we don't want him to become that. And there's multiple different ways, but if you're not certified in the proper way to get him help, you're just going to make it worse. And the implication here, while never explicitly stated, is that whatever therapist or psychiatrist he was seeing did not have the correct credentials or training for this kind of trauma. Pascal was understandably confused as to what Sebastian had done to cause Chris to see him as, quote, some sort of monster, and Seth explained that Chris doesn't see him as innocent because Sebastian had done some questionable things. In Seth's opinion, these were more issues of Sebastian having autism and not understanding social cues or personal boundaries. So the things that Sebastian was doing, according to Seth, were more along the lines of, while in the men's room, revealing a certain part of his anatomy and asking other men what theirs looked like, which Seth said was innocent kid stuff, probably not the best terminology, but with autism, he's not really wrong. You know, I'm sure there are other people here watching that remember in grade school that, you know, sometimes the autistic kids, especially back in the 2000s when this stuff wasn't nearly as well understood or normalized, sometimes would pull their pants all the way down in the bathroom. I would be willing to bet just about every guy who went to public school has experienced that. It was never a predatory thing. It was not understanding that that's not what you do at that age or in public. In any case, so far as Seth was aware, Sebastian had never done anything like this to Faith, who he says Sebastian saw, or sees, if we're being optimistic here, as a younger sister. And this was confirmed in Nina Gomez's interview. Both Nina and Seth told separate interviewers that Sebastian and Faith had a normal sibling relationship, and they talked to each other on FaceTime, even though they weren't blood relatives. They just saw each other as siblings. And as I said, to my knowledge, Chris has not denied this conversation with Seth taking place, nor has he made a statement contradicting Seth's claims. Katie, on the other hand, has. Her response, however, was a Facebook comment that said that the boy who assaulted Sebastian was not 13, that they did not allow Sebastian to be abused, and that he did get help. What she didn't do was clarify the boy's age, which makes me think that he was probably closer in age to 13 than to 8. She also didn't name the therapist Sebastian was seeing, nor did she give any indication of what that therapist's credentials were. On the other hand, she did admit that Seth was involved in the therapy. And in my opinion, that actually makes Seth's argument stronger, because if he was involved in the therapy, then he is familiar with the treatment and has every right to believe it was inadequate. In addition to that, rather than clarifying anything that she said about the situation, she added that Seth was banned from the base for his violent tendencies, and then she said something weird. According to her, Sebastian was seeing therapists to help him with trauma from Seth's abuse and the trauma from being assaulted by this child. That part struck me, because there appears to be no record of Seth ever abusing Sebastian outside of his 2016 divorce proceedings with Katie Proudfoot. You may recall that earlier in this video, I implied that certain aspects of Nina's account of her relationship with Chris closely mirrored certain actions, certain things that happened during Seth and Katie's divorce. I've been unable to find the court records from those proceedings, but what I have been able to find is a set of documents from that period, in which Katie makes some allegations, and Seth responds. For some background, Katie and Seth were married on June 21st, 2008, and Sebastian was born on December 7th of that same year. The circumstances of how they met are a little murky, as are the details of their marriage, but what I do know is that on February 26, 2016, exactly 8 years to the day before Sebastian went missing, Katie filed for divorce. On August 29th of that year, Katie had forcibly removed Seth from the home via a temporary restraining order, on the basis of a number of allegations. Listing Sebastian as a protected party, Katie accused Seth of physically abusing Sebastian, writing that since returning from deployment in December, I have witnessed a multitude of events from Seth. Among these were claims that she had seen him hit Sebastian in the head, neck, and back, and grab him with both hands, lift his entire body up, slam him down, and then proceed to beat him. In addition, she said that Seth, on many cases, whipped him with a belt, not paying attention to where he was hitting because he was so angry. She also wrote, "Neighbors informed me that during my duty days, the days she had to be on base, they have seen Sebastian on multiple occasions coming outside the house crying and looking for his dad." And this was allegedly because Seth had been gone for long periods of time, and neighbors had to tell Sebastian to go inside and lock the door, but none of them called CPS. Along with the allegations of physical abuse, Katie also accused Seth of inappropriate sexual behavior. Specifically, she said that Seth would on a regular basis just walk into the living room and get naked, not caring that Sebastian sees this. There were also claims of emotional manipulation on Seth's part associated with their divorce and Sebastian's anxiety over his parents splitting up. Apparently, Seth would tell Sebastian, "This is all because mommy doesn't want to love daddy anymore." Katie was the one who filed for divorce, just to be clear. That is in the San Diego court records. I was able to find that. In addition to all of this were assertions that Sebastian's teachers were uncomfortable with Seth and requested that the principal be present during any meetings involving him. She said that while they were explaining Sebastian's condition to one of his teachers, which included fluid on his brain, a pocket of fluid on his, the right side of his brain, Seth became irritated with Sebastian and hit him on the head in front of a faculty member. She claims that after she criticized him for this, he told her it wasn't that hard and that people need to stop telling him how to raise his son. There were also claims about CPS and social workers being involved, with Katie saying that Sebastian was very afraid of his father. She said both she and the social worker had witnessed events like Sebastian waking up in the middle of the night kicking and screaming, and that once at school he wet himself and was terrified of what would happen if Seth found out. Sebastian was also supposedly afraid that Seth would beat him if he made a mistake, though Katie did not elaborate on what kind of mistakes these would be. She did say that she had arranged for Sebastian to see a therapist because of this trauma, and even said that Sebastian was suffering from PTSD related to this abuse. Finally, she accused Seth of manipulating her communications and preventing her from speaking to anyone, including her own family, without him listening in. It may be that that was put in there to explain why she hadn't told anyone about the abuse, why she hadn't sought any sort of outside help, because to this point there had been no police reports, no doctor's visits, nothing. Altogether, it paints a pretty dark portrait of Seth, but not one without some questionable claims, which is why there is a process before a temporary restraining order becomes a domestic violence restraining order. As part of that process, Seth submitted a response to Katie's allegations, in which he denied some things and argued that others didn't warrant a domestic violence restraining order, the hearing for which was set for September 16th, 2016. Seth wrote that Katie's request for a restraining order is based upon the following, then listed 5 arguments that Katie had submitted in her completed filing. It seems the document of hers that I have access to, which I found on Reddit, was more for the TRO than the DVRO, not the complete filing for the domestic violence restraining order. And I say that because the arguments he's responding to include stuff that wasn't necessarily laid out in the document I read. In any case, those reasons were that Seth was highly aggressive in his mannerisms, cursed and yelled at her, which he did not deny, but also did say that it wasn't a basis for a restraining order under the facts. She also said Seth was very angry, yelling at Sebastian, and Sebastian told her, "Daddy hit me." Seth denied hitting Sebastian entirely. She said that Seth yelled at her and Sebastian, then slammed a door, breaking it, which he did not deny and did say wasn't a basis for a restraining order under the facts. She said Seth had issues with his temper, which he denied and stated it wouldn't be a basis for a domestic violence restraining order even if true. And finally, she said Seth was using drugs, which he denied and stated that it wouldn't be a basis for a DVRO even if true. And then following that, he said, "As a result of these baseless allegations, I respectfully request the court deny Katie's request for a permanent domestic violence restraining order in full. There is no basis for her claims, and she fails to prove conduct under the Domestic Violence Prevention Act that would justify a restraining order." A lot of people on Reddit and YouTube noted that this seems like kind of a "it didn't happen, but it's okay if it did" sort of thing, but I read it as Seth covering all of the legal bases. This was likely not just Seth writing this document, it was likely Seth and a lawyer. So him saying, "I didn't do it and it wouldn't be basis even if I did," in my opinion, seems like it's probably the lawyer saying, "Hey, also point that out." Or perhaps the lawyer is the one who did the final edit of the document anyway. Anyway, that's speculation. Maybe Seth is just being weird here. Seth then went on to cover specific incidents not mentioned in Katie's document, which is why I think that this is probably not a response to that directly, but a response to the domestic violence restraining order filing as a whole. The most recent of those incidents was from August 16th, 2016, which was a day before the restraining order was granted, and Seth wrote that the incident in question involved claims that he was watching Katie sleep and yelling at her for not being willing to beat Sebastian. Seth categorically denied doing either of those things and said that what actually transpired was entirely different. According to Seth, he had asked Sebastian to clean his room, but Sebastian told him that he didn't need to listen to anything that Seth said, and that Seth should apologize for telling him what to do. Seth claims that he attempted to appropriately discipline him by sternly telling him that under no circumstances should he ever speak to any adult in that way. At this, he says that Sebastian ran downstairs, jumped into his mother's lap, and then told her that he hated his father and wished he would leave and never come back. Katie allegedly walked outside after Sebastian had calmed down, at which point Seth says that Sebastian apologized and told him he loves him and he wants to live with him after all. And yes, I know it sounds a little, and then the whole bus clapped. Seth continued that after this incident, I was very upset, but I was never violent in any way. And he said the neighbor was in the house and watched the entire thing unfold. Supposedly, the neighbor asked what was wrong and said that the whole thing was kind of uncomfortable to witness, but Seth said he just wanted to go outside, have a cup of coffee, and calm down. He finished that story by reaffirming that he had not acted violently toward her or anyone in the house and had not yelled at her because she wouldn't beat Sebastian, her in this case being Katie. The second instance he addressed involved Katie's claim that on August 22nd, 2016, Seth was being belligerent and yelling at her and their son. He denied that this occurred at all, and from a legal standpoint, rightfully pointed out that this is not cause for a domestic violence restraining order. He explained that on this day, he and Katie had been arguing about how they were going to proceed with the divorce, which had been filed, but at the time, they were still living together, and they needed to figure out how to handle that tension. He says that during that argument, he left the home and slammed the door behind him. But that is not what broke the door. According to him, the door was already broken. He didn't elaborate on the specifics of the argument, but he did say that he never once acted violently and never once did he encourage her to beat their son. The final instance noted in the document is a claim that on October 11th, 2016, Seth was angry at Sebastian and hit him as a result, which Seth categorically denied doing. He pointed out that Sebastian suffers from a rare condition called 6q27 chromosomal deletion syndrome, and one of the symptoms of that is it causes you to hit and bite yourself out of frustration. Seth explained that Sebastian has been known to throw himself to the ground during these incidents, and that this is a very common occurrence for him, and others have witnessed him doing this. And in support of this claim, he says he filed declarations from some of these witnesses. Seth did describe the events of that day in the filing, but he gave a much more detailed version of the story to the Pascal show on April 5th. To be clear, that is April 5th of this year, not April 5th of 2016. Seth claimed that on that day he made Sebastian a deal, which was if the boy cleaned his room, then they could go swimming, because Sebastian, as all the parents have agreed, loves swimming. Seth said that he went off to go play a computer game, and that every 30 to 45 minutes he would go and he would check up on Sebastian, but at no point had Sebastian cleaned his room. He also clarified that only he and Sebastian were in the home at the time because Katie was already down by the pool with some of her girlfriends. Finally, about 4 or 5 hours after he had told Sebastian to clean up so that they could go to the pool, he went up to check on him and found that the room was now more of a mess than before, and that Sebastian was sitting butt naked playing his Wii. Rather than admonishing Sebastian, rather than yelling at him, punishing him for not doing his chores, Seth says that he just simply went to his own room, put on his swim trunks, got his beach towel, and then walked past Sebastian's door. And he says that when he walked by Sebastian's door, Sebastian noticed and mentioned that he also wanted to go swimming. Seth told him that since he hadn't cleaned his room or made his bed, he was not allowed to go swimming, and this made Sebastian very upset. Sebastian allegedly stormed across the room, stomping his feet, and in the process stomped on a Hot Wheels car, then tripped and began to fall towards the doorframe. Seth said that when this happened, he reached out and tried to put his hand between Sebastian's head and the wall, emphasizing that he'd much rather Sebastian hit his hand than the wood due to the fluid pocket on his brain. After ensuring Sebastian was okay, Seth says that he went downstairs and started to swim laps in the pool, and not long after that, Sebastian ran downstairs and jumped into his mom's lap and said, "Daddy hit me." It was at this point that he says Katie turned around and filed because we were in the middle of the divorce, still living in the same residence. She turned around and child abuse, domestic violence, and had a move-out order issued, and they served it like 3 days later. And I should be clear at this point that none of what he told Pascal on April 5th, 2024 contradicts anything in his 2016 filing, in which he notes that Katie never called the police, and Katie never took Sebastian for any medical care as a result of this alleged incident. He finished by stating, Katie never took any action whatsoever consistent with a parent whose child had been abused. Katie's allegation that I abused Sebastian in any way is completely false. Now, with regard to the more vague allegations of him having temper and drug issues, Seth argued that it was untrue that he yelled and screamed at her with balled fists, as she alleged, and that while he was on painkillers, they were legitimately prescribed. He agreed that he did yell at her at times and that they did argue, but that he never threatened her with violence. As for the drugs he was taking, they were for 9 herniated discs in his back, a torn meniscus in his left knee, and 3 tears in his right shoulder, all of which should be corroborable by his doctor. In addition, he stated that he was in physical therapy for his injuries, and whoever the physical therapist was, they should also
for delicious margaritas,
unless those records were destroyed. Now, them being destroyed would not necessarily be suspicious after 8 years. If they're digital, however, might be a little weird. Adding on to all of that, he said that he finds it ridiculous that Katie alleges she is in fear of him, as even if he was acting violently, he would not be able to physically abuse her due to his injuries. While I am in great physical pain, he argued, Katie is not only physically healthy, but as she is in the Navy, she has received training in physical combat techniques. She has no fear of me. That one, I have to say, feels a little flimsy, given that Seth seems to be a rather large man. But at the same time, Katie does not appear to be much of a small woman, and if Seth was legitimately that injured, I could see where he's coming from. The next portion of the document is his response to Katie's child custody order request, which, while is not explicitly described at any point in the document, it seems was designed to prevent Seth from seeing Sebastian, based on what Seth said in the document. Seth wrote, I find it disheartening that Katie alleges Sebastian has anything to fear from me. I have always been Sebastian's primary caregiver. As Katie is in the Navy and is stationed on board a ship, she works and is often deployed while I act as a stay-at-home dad. I care for Sebastian's day-to-day needs, and this is a continuous task given his special needs due to his condition. I love it and embrace it, even though it can be troubling at times. Sebastian and I have built a special bond due to the fact that I am always home with him, taking care of him. He has no reason to fear me. I should note that I have not verified this yet, but it seems that at this time, Sebastian had not yet been diagnosed with autism. Towards the end of the document, Seth outlined what he believed was really going on here, saying that Katie only filed this request for a domestic violence restraining order in order to gain a tactical advantage in our divorce. He suggested that Katie cooked up the domestic violence accusation as a way to kick him out of the house and to prevent him from seeing his son. Lastly, Seth addressed Katie's request that the court order him to pay her attorney's fees, even though Seth was a stay-at-home dad with no significant income of his own, and Katie was an E5 in the Navy with, at this time, based on what I found on her LinkedIn, at least 5 years of experience. While not a huge payday, the salary and benefits for a Navy E5 with 4+ years of experience and 2 dependents are nothing to sneeze at. So basically, Seth's argument here was Katie doesn't need me to pay her attorney's fees, she can pay them herself. In fact, not only that, but Seth argued that since she made significantly more than he did, and because her request was, as he put it, baseless and unnecessary, it should be her paying for his attorney's fees, not the other way around. And then in his conclusion, he restated his main points, writing that Katie and Sebastian have no reason to fear me. I have never harmed, harassed, or threatened them. Katie's request for a domestic violence restraining order is simply a tactic she is using to try and get me kicked out of the marital residence and cease my contact with our son. I respectfully request the court deny her request in full. I also request the court order Katie to pay my reasonable attorney's fees to defend against her false accusations. In the end, the domestic violence restraining order did not go through, and it seems that Seth was granted shared custody with no specific time arrangements. Now, it is of course possible that Seth is everything Katie described and that he just got very lucky and managed to weasel out of these allegations. But I think we need to go through the claims and evidence here because they're all rather important to the point I'm trying to make. Looking back at this, Katie accused Seth of multiple incidences of child abuse, citing numerous witnesses including teachers, neighbors, social workers, therapists, and naval personnel as they would have had to process this alleged ban of Seth from the naval base. Included amongst her claims were accusations that Seth had hit Sebastian in the head in front of a teacher while being fully aware that his son had a pocket of fluid in his brain. She also said that while she was on deployment, a then 7-year-old Sebastian would be abandoned for long periods of time and her neighbors would have to tell him to go home and lock the door, but none of them called CPS. Katie also said that when she brought the temporary restraining order to Sebastian's school, they notified her that they had called CPS a week prior. And then, in addition to the accusations that involved witnesses, she also accused Seth of a number of other inappropriate and unacceptable behaviors. She claimed that he would frequently expose himself to Sebastian by walking around the house naked. She said that Seth would get angry at their son, throwing him to the ground and beating him, and that he would at times whip him repeatedly with a belt. And when it came to Seth's behavior towards her, she accused him of threatening her with violence and preventing her from seeking help or communicating with her family. The problem is that when I see all of this laid out, even if we totally ignore Seth's version of the story, it seems utterly impossible to me that she could be telling the truth given the outcome of the case. Considering the number of witnesses she claimed to have, her behavior in the 9 months between returning from deployment and filing for that TRO, and the resources she had through the military, it just doesn't add up. Seth was a stay-at-home dad while she worked on a military base, so she had plenty of time away from Seth in a place where he could only access with her permission. Due to that, I don't see how she could claim that Seth was preventing her from communicating with friends and family. Even if he was monitoring her calls and texts, she could have easily used a computer at work. Then there's the allegations of Seth abusing and abandoning Sebastian, which were supposedly witnessed by a teacher and by neighbors. Despite this, the court did not grant Katie a domestic violence restraining order, when testimony to these claims certainly should have won her the case. Finally, while not a claim with witnesses, there is the fact that she accused Seth of picking Sebastian up, throwing him to the ground, and then proceeding to beat him. Now keep in mind, this was not listed in the domestic violence restraining order petition. So this happened before August. This happened a while ago. However, she didn't file a police report, didn't take Sebastian to the hospital, and did not request a temporary restraining order at the time that this supposedly occurred. Instead, she waited several months and then chose to file for a TRO when Sebastian claimed Seth had hit him at a time that she did not witness it. So just to be clear here, when Katie actively witnessed Seth picking up an 8-year-old with a fluid pocket on his brain, slamming him to the ground and then beating him, that was not enough for a temporary restraining order. However, when Sebastian, clearly completely fine, ran downstairs and claimed he'd been hit at a time when Katie was not there to witness it, that's when she chose to file the order. To top all of it off, if this were true, then Katie's recent decision to allow Sebastian to move in with his father full-time would be remarkably irresponsible, if not criminally negligent. And yet, according to Chris, Katie, and Seth, the plan was, in 2024, for Sebastian to move in with his father full-time. So in 2016, Seth is a horribly abusive person who is a danger to Sebastian, routinely beats him, does things that arguably could kill him given his condition, yells at him, screams at him, just all around horrible person, horrible parent. But in 2024, he's fine. Like I said, it's possible that Seth just got really, really lucky, but from what I'm seeing, it seems that nobody was able to offer convincing testimony in support of Katie. And that's not the only thing I found odd about her claims. You see, as I went through the allegations, I started to see a pattern in what Katie said and did about Seth's alleged abuse. Katie said that Seth hit Sebastian with a belt. Katie took out a TRO, which is something Chris did. Katie said that her ex-spouse was unstable, which is something Chris did. So why is that relevant? Well, that's what I've been working towards this whole time. If you take Chris, Katie, Nina, and Seth's stories all together, then I think there are some questions worthy of further investigation by the authorities.